Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Ian from the Fruitmarket. Thanks for bearing with us while we all libated ourselves earlier. That was great. Nice to see everyone in a Friday feeling. I want to welcome you to tonight's Sonic's Poetics reading. I won't say very much, but just to give a little bit of framing, I want to thank one of our readers tonight, David Hopkins, who was the grit in the oyster and that made the pearl that you're going to experience tonight. David, for a long time, has been working with us in various capacities, from art historian to curator, and oftentimes a poet, and sort of somewhere in between as well. And he's a big champion of what some people would call sound poetry, and what after tonight they might call sonic poetics, if his wonderful essay in the handout that you got catches on, and I hope it does, because it's a lovely statement that leans into a manifesto at the end. But the idea for tonight and for today was to bring together poets who, as I think I say in the advertising, put sound front and center of their practice. So they don't necessarily define as sound poets, they don't necessarily only do sound poetry, but often they're manifestly thinking about sound as a strong component of how they structure and present their work. So today we had the pleasure of hosting Anthony Capildeo, who, like a champion, read for 5 hours in the space in a sound installation that they'd made with our team here, with Matt, our AV technician, which was like a sort of wonderful woven live and improvised cave. It was a cave of sound and light. So we had that this afternoon, and now we're moving into live readings. Tonight we have 3 distinguished readers. We'll be going Philip Terry, Karenjit, Sandhu, and then ending with David Hopkins at the end. So to come full circle for the person who started all this in tow. So I'd like to invite our first reader tonight, Philip Terry, who's up from Essex. Please welcome to the stage.
Seems to be working. Here we go. The title of this at the top of my page says it's called Some Reflections on Sound Poetry. But there are some bits of sound poetry in it, but it starts a little bit like a kind of talk. What is sound poetry? All poetry involves sound, I'm tempted to say. But then the moment I say this, I start to think of exceptions. Johann Brosse's visual poems, or his poem objects, do not involve sound. And I'm tempted to think of them, therefore, as soundless poetry. One of these is hanging on the wall to my left in my sitting room as I make these notes. It's a screen print of a giant red S measuring 53 centimeters by 22 centimeters, with the tail of a fish entering the S, bottom left, and exiting the head, top right. You can read this poem as articulating something about letters and objects, the way in which the letter S and the word fish, at least in English, are inextricably connected, as they are in Catalan, peixos. But you can't read it out loud. It remains silent. And yet even here, sound becomes an absent presence. And the more the eye concentrates on the red S, the more noisy the poem becomes. The S is like the blood of the fish seeping onto the fishmonger's marble slab as it is split in 2 by a knife. Or I hear the whoosh of the fish in the water as it darts about to avoid a predator, now in one place, now whoosh in another. The absence of noise multiplies noise. The soundless poem metamorphoses, and this, after all, is the theme of the poem on one level, where a letter metamorphoses into a fish, into a poem that is full of noises if we open our ears. So perhaps, after all, it isn't all that far from the truth to say that all poetry involves sound, with the proviso that this sound might not always be heard. It might be missed. It might be misheard. And this missing is something I would also say is characteristic of much poetry. When we read poems, or when I read poems, I often miss something, which is why we read poems again, why they don't disclose all their meanings, all their resonances, all their sonic resources at once. When I think of the first time I encountered sound poetry, I think of names like Bob Cobbing, Kurt Schwitters, Steve McCaffrey, Tristan Tzara, and Edwin Morgan, whose sound poem, The Loch Ness Monsters Song, beginning Snwffel, Hwnnwffel, Hwnnwffel, Nuffel, Huffel, was probably the first sound poem I came across, and which in my teens I turned into a song, singing the lines in a slightly deranged manner over acoustic guitar, recording lost. But I think the first time I encountered something resembling sound poetry must have been in the womb, for we begin to hear in the womb after about 18 weeks of pregnancy, and our hearing develops rapidly after that. What do we hear? We hear whatever is going on outside us, among which will be the voices of adults, muffled, lacking sense, coming from another room which we are shut off from, and whose existence we know nothing of, except for these muffled sounds which penetrate our space, no doubt mixed with the gurglings and whooshings of the internal organs. It strikes me that many sound poems, whatever else they're signifying, contain an echo of this originary misheard speech, jumbled up with organ music, whether by accident or design. I certainly hear something like this in Morgan's poem, The Loch Ness Monsters Song, which ends, Groff, goff, gaff, gomble, mubble, bull, blum, 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 blum. In this connection, I think of Julia Kristeva's semiotic chora, where the child, still undifferentiated from its environment, is infinitely open and connected to all that surrounds it. And I think of Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Joyce was one of the writers championed in Kristeva's book Revolution in Poetic Language. And it strikes me that the voices we hear, or half hear, as we read confusedly the pages of Finnegan's Wake, the greatest, certainly the longest sound poem in the language. As he was sampling me leather like hulp, he fell the fall of me force, he says, like yelp. I very like these voices we might half hear in the womb, voices coming from another room in a language we don't know. One of the voices I would have heard when I was in the womb was the voice of Seamus Heaney, for in the early 1960s he was a frequent visitor to my parents' house in Belfast. And while I was in no way conscious of this at the time, this may have lain behind one of my first experiments with sound poetry, a piece called Seamus Heaney, Sound Poet, in collaboration with the Czech poet Gershon Hepner for a Camarade event. The text was inspired by the following exchange between Dennis O'Driscoll and Seamus Heaney in Stepping Stones. There was no question of sound poetry. Had you any interest in Kurt Schwitters or Ernest Jandl or their English followers, Bob Cobbing, say? No, says Heaney. I have nothing at all to declare in that area. I did hear Bob comment in his antics a couple of times and enjoyed him, but had no desire to do likewise. This comes in the middle of a discussion of Heaney's third collection, Wintering Out, a book in which the sound of words plays a greater part than it does in his previous books. So we took this idea and used it to turn Heaney's work further in the direction of sound poetry. We took the poem Anahorish, soft gradient of consonant, vowel, meadow, and read it backwards. Like this, the last line of Heaney's poem, at wells and dunghills, became Sli Huggen Udna Sli Wuta. Gershon then translated this into Czech using Google Translate, which turned the first 5 sounds into his first line. Sli Nus Nasli, which translates as they went, found disgust. The poem we finally read in performance was a collage of all of these texts, one superimposed on the other, into a soundscape that moved in and out of sense, all derived from the soundscape of Heaney's original poem. I'm not sure what Seamus Heaney would have made of it, but it went down okay on the night. Subsequently, usually without being too conscious about what I was doing, and rarely setting out deliberately to write sound poems, I found myself working with the sounds of poetry on several occasions. One of these occasions was a commission to write a text for a music dance piece by the composer Richard Hoadley called Semaphore. The music for this piece, inspired by serial music, was scored for electronic piano, and the dance was choreographed using flags like those that would be used to send messages by semaphore. One of the unique features of the piece was that the music, composed using code, was never the same in any 2 performances, for it was controlled and altered by the movement of the dancers, which was picked up by sensors, and these movements in turn affected a score which was generated live and played by cello and clarinet. When it came to writing a text for this piece, I wanted to avoid what I saw as one of the frequent drawbacks of librettos, namely that the word text had little or nothing to do with the music. So to this end, I came up with the idea of using sound to generate the words, deconstructing the title semaphore into the sound units sem, af, and or, and composing a text in which these sounds repeated as frequently as possible, and in which other sounds that came along by chance also repeated and echoed through the piece. Not altogether eliminating meaning, but rather than imposing meanings, letting these emerge almost by chance from the composition. Here's the opening from one of the drafts for this text, where this process is, I think you can clearly hear. Semaphore, or some are for, just as elsewhere some are against. Some for, some far, some fear to offer, or seem to fear, or fear to seem afar or afar, so that through the undergrowth and across the map a flare, or a care, or a car, or semaphore. Semaphore, in ephor, sphere, hampers, amperes, seems to heap the seamers or saws to seam, to see the same hemp, perm, or amp poem for a seamstress, or a sum, or sim, a morph, a sperm, a graph, or semantic dance, a phase, a farce, or semaphore. After Semaphore, I've continued collaborating with Richard Hoadley, and from time to time, sonic environments have played and continue to play a role in my poetry. Dictator, my version of the Epic of Gilgamesh translated into Globish, where the words are often cut down the middle and separated by vertical dashes, is in many ways a sonic piece. And recently, when writing a series of poems responding to the pandemic called COVIDs, I found myself responding to Virgil's Underworld by creating a visit to the underworld where, contra Virgil, all the dead do not speak Latin, and their words verge on the undecipherable, like words coming from another room. muffled and incomprehensible. This piece is in the little booklet you have, as it will make more sense if you see it. I'll try and read a bit of it. Untitled, after Virgil, Aeneid, Book 6. And this finally brings me to today, to these sonic environments in Edinburgh. So as soon as I got the invite from Anthony Varney, I started to think of possible pieces I might work on. The first of these was an Oulipian translation of one of the most famous sound poems, Hugo Ball's Dada poem, Gadji Beribimba, which I did an adapted S+7 on, where each letter is translated by moving it on 7 places in the alphabet. So Ball's first line, Gadji Beribimba, Glenridi Laula Ionica Dori, becomes Pimru, Kotsu, Kukvi, Pitumzumo, Tieti, Taulimatsu, and so on. The second of these pieces was a piece called Sound in the Sonnets, where Shakespeare's sonnets were taken apart and deconstructed into the sound units of the lines, then recomposed as soundscapes without apparent meaning. The third was a take on Edmund Morgan's poem, Opening the Cage, where he riffs on and recombines the words of Cage's famous statement, I have nothing to say, and I'm saying it, and that is poetry. So this piece I called Reopening the Cage, and it takes that statement, then going through the dictionary, replaces the words say and saying with whatever verbs the dictionary throws up. So it potentially goes all the way through the dictionary and is very long. Here's a little bit of it. I have nothing to say, and I'm saying it, and that is poetry.
For I am every dead.
I have nothing to scabble, and I'm scabbling it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scold, and I'm scolding it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scale, and I'm scaling it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scalp, and I'm scalping it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scamp, and I am scamping it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scamper, and I'm scampering it, and that is poetry. I have nothing to scam, and I'm scanning it, and that is poetry. And so on. Finally, the idea I settled on, though this is still a work in progress, I call Nocturne. And this is what you've been hearing in the background as I've been talking. So this piece is based on John Donne's poem, A Nocturnal upon St. Lucy's Day. Lucy, who scarce 7 hours herself unmasked, has done right. St. Lucy's Day, December the 13th, is the shortest day of the year, or was prior to calendar reforms. And when Donne says she scarce 7 hours herself unmasks, he's referring to the fact that there are only 7 hours of daylight on this day. Of course, the actual length of St. Lucy's Day depends on where you are on the globe. In Scandinavia, where the festival is still celebrated, there are far fewer than 7 hours. But I settled on the length of 7 hours and decided to stretch a recording of Donne's poem out to this length and create a soundscape that would fill those 7 hours of daylight. I did this with the help of my son Lou, who knows a lot more about manipulating sound than I do. And he not only stretched out a recording of my voice reading the poem, but treated it with sonic effects, including a Maya band, to enhance the sonic landscape. By a happy coincidence, the sounds produced bear some resemblance to womb music, that music which attempts to recreate the sounds of the womb, and which you can buy to play to your child to calm him or her down and help them sleep, as I did for Lou when he was tiny, when I wasn't playing him Radiohead, who I'd just discovered at the time. As I say, the piece isn't finished, but what you're hearing now is a draft of the sound part, which in total lasts around 7 hours. In the finished piece, as I imagine it, the soundscape would be part of an installation, and this is how I'd imagine that. You would enter a darkened room. Could be any room, though perhaps a church would be ideal. A small rural church, to my mind, with a low ceiling, full of dust, old chairs lying about, tombs. Or perhaps better, the room would be empty, cleared of chairs and tombs alike, like an empty warehouse or a mortuary. You would see little in the darkness, which would be full of smoke, like dry ice. And at first, you would have difficulty orienting yourself in the darkness. Then little by little, as your eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, you would come to see that in the center of the room there was a sunken stone rectangle containing water, a bit like a small rectangular swimming pool or a trough, say 6 meters square, maybe a meter deep or less, so that if you stepped in it, you would get your feet wet, but you wouldn't drown. Or better, rather than water, the pool would be filled with something resembling a swamp, a peat bog in formation, covered with sphagnum moss. Every so often, from the ceiling, glowing objects would fall slowly to the ground, momentarily illuminating the room, before landing in the water with a fizz and a splash.
But I am none.
As they were extinguished, and the room was once more plunged into darkness. These would be the feeble light squibs sent forth by the nearly spent sun in Donne's poem. The word squibs refers to musketry, specifically a half charge, or it could refer to a firework, either way suggesting a short-lived burst of light. I don't know yet how these light squibs would be produced, perhaps by small falling fireworks, perhaps by molten steel falling from the ceiling, as I saw recently in an installation at the Venice Biennale. So as you listen to the soundscape, you see in the darkness light squid fall into the water where they are extinguished. and fizzle out. The whole piece lasts 7 hours, though you don't need to be there for 7 hours, as with any installation with a long duration. You can come and go as you please. At intervals, perhaps Donne's poem would be read softly through loudspeakers. Perhaps, too, someone carrying a candle, as St. Lucy was said to have carried a candle through the Roman catacombs, bringing food to sheltering Christians, would pass through the room. Perhaps, too, like St. Lucy, she would carry food, loaves, and fish. I don't know. Tis the year's midnight, and it is the days, Lucy's, who scarce 7 hours herself unmasks. The sun is spent, and now his flasks send forth light squibs, no constant rays. The world's whole sap is sunk, the general balm the hydroptic earth hath drunk. Whither, as to the bed's feet, life is shrunk, dead and interred. Yet all these seem to laugh, compared with me, who am their epitaph.
Thank you so much, Philip. That was a wonderful way to start this evening's programme. We'll take a little 10-minute break now. I should have said earlier, the books from each of the authors that have been part of today's programme are for sale in the bookshop. Philip's most latest one is the Lascaux Notebooks, which is a translation of a forgotten French poet's, possibly, if this is real or not, attempts to decipher the cave paintings in the Lascaux caves into proto-poems, and it's fascinating, fun, and very much like Philip himself. So yeah, go and have a look at those, get a drink, and make yourselves comfortable, and we'll see you back at 20 past. Welcome back, everyone, to the next part of the event. I can see David frantically gesturing to get everyone back in. Thank you, David, for ushering the troops back in. That's great. So our next reader, as well, our next reader tonight is Karenjit Sandhu. Karenjit first crossed the threshold at the Fruitmarket for an event last year when she read as part of a wonderful showcase with the 87 Press, who've published a really great book called Young Girls, which is here in the bookshop for sale. And there's another book which, sadly, because of postal strikes, more of an assemblage, I think, hasn't made it to the bookshop tonight, but it will be here at some point next week. So if you love it and you enjoy hearing Karenjit read and perform from fragments from the Irritating Archive, then Guillemot Press will actually have got some to us soon. And I think you've got a copy that you're going to visibly display tonight. So I'll hand over to Karenjit, and please welcome her to the stage.
That's it. I'm going to begin by reading from Young Girls, which was a publication with the 87 Press last year. And the poems are a reimagining of the life of an Indian-Hungarian artist, Amrita Shergill, in the 1930s. But the collection plays around with sound in various ways, and I hope some of that is apparent tonight. I should mention that Amrita Shergill begins life in Budapest. She travels to Paris, Florence, spends much of her youth there, and then she eventually ends up in Shimla in India, and she dies very young in her mid-20s. Budapest. I pull into a side road just before the train station and turn around in my seat to face you. My knee nudges the flask in my cup holder and it spills all over my thigh, forming a little well under the shade of my skirt. I'm embarrassed, but determined not to show it. I sit facing you, staring ahead. Your train to the city departs at 8:19. Right now, you're stuck at 8:11. You still have tickets to buy, but determined, I will not let you go. Yet. Not until you've said all the things you wanted to say yesterday at dusk, but you were too embarrassed to say it as you passed round burnt meats. Tough. Then unexpectedly, you pull your face forwards, our noses touch, and you're looking straight into my eyes, and I'm looking straight into your mouth, and 1,000 yous, because you, then I, grey me, pretty you, have a way, I, into you, fleeting this, less dark this, fulfillment grey, I, you, the fleeing you, the light, and I, the long you, to belong not you but me, and pretty you, and grey me flee out. Sugar in the front seats of cars. We sit inside your car. We wait for the full moon. I watch your sweat be at a drip. You pass me a sugar. I think of what you make her to say to drive you home me. Jelly's fugitive. Remember from the age of 5 and every year after, your mother hosted these birthday parties for you in your front garden. A long table covered in multiple sheets of green crepe paper, sellotaped together and fading in the sun. We all sat around it, our toes grazing the grass, and she would serve us jelly with a big sickly scoop of angel delight. These days, it's comforting to think of that jelly, and probably for you, there's much consolation in knowing that you're back with the jelly now. Jelly, petrol thickened and smelling of soap. Jelly with its alkali taste, its burnt oils and waste fats. Soap. Remember you liked to watch that soap opera after school on Mondays, the one about a coffee house in Hungary somewhere, along the Danube, I think. Anyway, back to remembering you and the solace you found in returning to the jelly now, but this time as a flamethrower, tenacious and tacky like treacle. To know you're out there, fleeting and fiery in transit, quick to disappear into the exploding jelly clouds, and probably for you there's much relief in that. Here to burn letters. 27th of February, dear red-hot plaza on a plinth where rests a tower made from stacked wooden crates of brown birch, 15 feet high, tower burns. Inside each crate, letters, blazing, handwritten notes, typewritten words, burning, printed communication, alight, lined, burning, hole punched, burning, folded parchment plain, burning, scented, burning, cardi and handmade, burning, scorched edges, crinkled flakes, burning, down hemp, wrapping shards, button, coaling, cotton fabric, burning, cotton fabric, burning, printed, burning, recycled silk, singed orange, burning, bonded, matte, coated, watermarked, burning, black and charred, glossed, rag tissue, burning flax, burning corn, burning mulberry, burning seed, burning continues higher. Entry 4, the OED, a burning letter, written communication, addressed to a fiery person, raging organization, or another flaming body, sent by burning post or messenger, burning ignited letters, burning yours truly. Marie L.C., burning tales of the burning summer of 97, signed Malcolm, burning magazine cutouts with burning love from Edith, burning Polaroids thinking of Ujamil, burning stickers which burn colours, sending burning kisses with hugs, Carl XX. And then lastly, inside the sugar factory. So many gaps about why I was there, why this factory, why sugar. Many gaps like this one. I was briefly distracted by the dotted trees and all the... I looked out of the factory's high windows and thought, for miles and miles, clusters of thatch-roofed mud huts with and pink roses pressed up against and a white wall. I listened to the sounds of voices, sonorous and lifting into, and I'm not sure why, but the factory sirens began to wail just in time for... I saw moving. I do remember thinking, but I couldn't. A sprawling, I decided to, in the grass. I was holding and I remember, or not, it was vast, but also, I think, a palatial estate or something else maybe. Why was I this factory? Sugar. I'm going to read from my second collection, which is a box set, and it's titled Poetic Fragments from the Irritating Archive. So I'll just read a selection of poems from this. The year is 1603, and archive is a noun. It is a place in which public records or other important historic documents are kept. It is a place of preservation. Welcome to the Irritating Archive. In the event of an emergency, leave by the nearest exit. Founded in 2016 by an archivist responsible for uncovering a fragmented collection of irritating artifacts and documents dating back to 2006, the Irritating Archive houses all items from this collection, some of which have been painstakingly restored and photographically documented. The archive is open to visitors by appointment only. It particularly welcomes artists, poets, and researchers with an interest in irritating words and objects. The collection is organized into distinct fragments: history, rules and regulations, collection, visitor's book, archivist's notes. For health and safety, the archive requests that all visitors wear closed-toe shoes, long trousers or skirts fully covering the legs, long sleeve shirts, and the gloves and apron provided upon arrival. Long hair is to be confined and loose jewelry secured. It is vital that all visitors to the archive wash their hands thoroughly before entering and exiting the archive. It is important for visitors to know that they enter at their own risk. The gloves. The archivist's notes. Diagram of an irritation scale. Anger is defined by the OED as a strong feeling. It has been coupled with other states such as distress and suffering, as well as the synonyms wrath, rage, fury. Anger compared to irritation is therefore more extreme than irritation's milder state. It is useful to visualize these two negative states on a semantic scale, as shown in Figure 1. Where anger resides at the high intensity end of the scale, antithetical to irritation at the lower and milder end. Lost souls. A body is floating in the Kallang River. There is a tent in the distance. It's Sunday afternoon, and on Sundays, the unclassified neighbors from across the street head towards the water. They eat game and fowl and discard the bones in Nimishillen Creek. The young release these princess balloons which float above the inlet. The old, they light candles for the water. The body is naked. There is a sign which reads, "Prevent accidents." The body is mystical. Its herbaceous outline blooms with these lush plastic fruits. It lies underneath a safe spot. Prevent accidents. The body floats into an emphatic pose which looks like prevent accidents. The railroad tracks have been classified and form the backdrop to prevent accidents. Sounds can be heard off the Mexican coast, and the body joins an auditory system of floating acoustic monitors, prevent the spatial depth, prevent of the wood scrapyard, curtain of tarpaulin, is underground in the eland mind, in a duffel bag along an equestrian trail to seed pulled from the canal, it vanishes and is later identified beside Seed, the volcano at Lake Atalan or Banjaluka. The body is 30 miles from but the lights in the arcades, accidents, spatial depth, clings to the tomb of theatricality, dizzying with profound acceleration, on dark split course, on the LA hiking trail, lined with stuffed animals, this Wednesday night, illegal fishing nets, the amplified figures with a ghostly palette dent, the body, the body is floating in the Rappahannock River and is buoyed up by the boat ramp which crosses Little Falls. In the distance, there's a tent overlooking the mountain. Exhumed in Mortology autopsy of prevent dolphin-like clicks, the abandoned Shiroi city, decomposing miracles which refloat, and disappear, canals and showtimes, the body is hit, the creek east of Soper, Wellington County, and Donegal, foreshortening the body from near extinct Ashwaha to D San Marco, prevents the body floats here. Figure 2. Emotions, they're described as strong feelings or instinctive feelings. They consist of primary and background emotions. In relation to the former, there are 6 so-called primary emotions. There's happiness, there's sadness, fear, anger, surprise, or disgust. Irritation is labelled as a background emotion alongside the following: jealousy, calm, and guilt. This further highlights the distinction between anger, a primary emotion, and irritation, a background emotion, which reinforces their position at opposite ends of the semantic scale. Welcome to the irritating archive. In the case of an emergency, leave by the nearest exit. Come inside and uncover a body of thought. Sit beside a body of insight where a body of knowledge is to be found, covered in the body of something like a body of lies or a body of evidence. Approach a body of art and rebuke a body of research. A body of work is no different from a body of water, which has a body of intent found in a body of leftovers that is not only a body of proof, but is also the body of a porpoise, which is now categorized as a body of husbandry, a body of truth, a body of worth, and thus a body of approval, as opposed to a body of suspicion, a full-bodied body. Sorry, just two more. So, the visitor's book. Mouldy neckline. A queue of women up to their eyes in trouble, square necklines, lettuce hearts plunging into these multicellular filaments of no anti-nobodies, leather tan across their face, a single-celled neckline of droplets. A queue of women, a queue of months, a queue of moody blooms, bugging eyes, spiked bleach, cross-hatched excess, hypha scars, yeast habits, unsightly queues wafting through basements, swallowing ground floors, spitting excess windows. Oh, the tiny pixels of Columbus Avenue, lines shake the fault line, stretch rapidly during bittersweet walks for miles, passing everyone. Growth. Protrude and extend the fungus of embellished headgear, those 16th century queens with patterned faces, sculpted biceps and burgundy lips fix their humble stickers onto the temple. Its gigantic columns, naked stickers curl and peel. Moisture leaks and rising seeps, leaking pipes of affection in this Belle Epoch era of bodies grinding meat, sheer waste. Damp collars, bodies rise, a queue of women in the rain seeping, consuming the inside of the window frame. Unhappy moo.
Unhappy moo. Separating from mother was counterproductive.
It's always counterproductive.
A burden overstretching the boundaries of regret. Hives popped up in the morning rush.
That were polarized by plants in an hour of cowering and cows and unhappily mooing in bathtubs of
hour
loss.
of shouldering the burden which pops the rash on the skin of cows.
The morning rush of hives, polarized plants in an hour of clash. Clash hour. Ooh, moo. Emergency swelling lips and suspicious looks from the passers-by. Ooh, moo. Unhappy moo. Unhappy board this train. Its roof leaks. Rash on the skin of cows unhappily mooing in bathtubs of loss. The cows unhappy. Moo. Glublins. Ooh, moo. Tungs oats. Roots scratch with cries. Beady oohs. And waves. Ooh, pinion. Unhappy mooing plug into an anti-booty network. This network is moothers. Unhappy mooing moothers. These tactics which drag and call for the tactics call for moother. Unhappy mooing moothers. Milk is runny and itchy. Sample size. The train beats through emergencies. Ooh, wheezing. Assembling ecology all in the side.
Ecology all in the side.
The tactics of
faces civilly press their skin against a
unhappily moving
glass window panes.
The window
lacking
moves on the outside.
run,
Outside
instead
mooing.
arrested,
Unhappy,
affected.
moo.
Outside,
Unhappy,
outside. Faces
moo.
civilly press their skin against a raw glass window panes, lacking tools to run, instead arrested, regretted, affected.
Thank you.
Amazing, Karenjit. Thank you so much. Or thank you so much. It was very good. Right, we'll just take another 10 and back here at 5-2 for David Hopkins. See you then. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything very much other than just encourage everyone to sit down. But here, as promised, is the instigator, the inspirer, and general provocateur, who is David Hopkins. David, I won't eat into your time. I look forward to hearing what you've got to give us tonight. So welcome to the stage, David Hopkins.
Okay. Gaji, Berry, Bimba, Glandridi, Laula, Loni, Kadori, Gajama, Grama, Berida, Bimbala, Glandri, Galasasa, Lola Tolomini, Gaji, Berry, Bin, Blasa, Glasala, Loli, Loni, Cadorso, Sasala, Bim, Gajama, Tuffum, Zim, Zala, Bin, Ban, Gligla, Wo, Liminai, Bin, Berry, Ban, O Catalomina, Rhinocerosola, Hapsaman, Lola Tolomini, who? Gajama, Rhinocerosola, Hapsaman, Bluku, Terulala, Blalala, Lu. Zimzim, Urulula, Zimzim, Uralula, Zimzim, Zanzibar, Zimzala, Zam, Elephantolam, Brusala, Boloman, Trumptata. Velo da bang bang, Afalo Persamai, Langado Tor, Gajama, Bimbalo, Glandridi, Glasala, Zingtata, Pimpalo, Grogu. Violo Lexita, Violo Zimbrabim, Viola Uli, Puluju Malu. Tuffum, Zimbrabim, Negramai Bimbalo, Tuffum, Zim. Gajama, Bumbalo, Berry, Gajama, Gaga, Di Gajama, Afalo, Pinks. Gaga di Bumbalo, Gajaman, Gaga di Bling Blong, Gaga Blung. Thank you. I couldn't do it with an Italian accent. So there have been mentions already of Bob Cobbing, and when I was very much younger, I was fortunate enough to do various readings with Bob, and so I'm going to do one piece which is a sort of Bob Cobbing piece. Bob, Bobbin, Bowtree, Boffin, Brainbox, Breadhead, Bog Roll, Baritone, colander, conman, croupier, call girl, crooner, crabapple, codpiece, cobbing. Cobbing, codpiece, crabapple, crooner, call girl, croupier, conman, colander. Bob, bobbin, bowtree, boffin. Brainbox, breadhead, bog-roll, baritone. Cobbing, baritone, bog-roll, codpiece. Crabapple, breadhead. Brainbox, crooner. Call girl, boffin. Bowtree, croupier. Conman, bobbin. Bob, colander. Thank you. But to be a toe pit, to be or not to bleed, a trope or a trapeze, to be appeased by sleaze or turds as small as peas, to be a tome twit, to wit to who? A two-wit, a po-face, a toe print, a true who. To whittle the spittle down to the piddle, a potty trick, a poo try. But to be a toe pit, to rhyme with regatta. So, well, it's true I had a part to play in all of this, although Ian's responsible really for pulling it all together. But I have actually very few sound poems, I'm afraid. But little bits of sound come in here and there, and some of the poems refer in various ways to sound. This poem's got one sound in it. I mean, you know, apart from the words. Okay. It's a domestic poem. It's about domesticity. The Morningside poem. Houseplants. Cat's pad. Cats pad by houseplants. Spring's gone, old bum sits on worn settee. Houseplants. Cats pad by houseplants. Sniff compost. This is addresses itself to silence. I used to, one time, was working in London and during the week, and then at the weekends going to a little village in Cheltenham called Prestbury, and which was always, you know, I used to arrive late at night, and it was always so silent, having come out of London. And, you know, I used to imagine the silence being broken, and this poem addresses itself to that idea. It's called Sleep is Serious. Sleep is serious. Eyes shut up shop. Mouth clamps down on small talk. Silence listens. Frost watches. Eyelash nestles on white field. An idiot lurches down the lane with a flashlight, drunk on daylight. Sleep is serious. I guess I imagine somebody, drawing up the window and shouting. Okay. Most of these, the first part of this set are quite sort of oldish poems. And so when I was starting out writing poetry, I was very, as I talked about Bob Cobbing a little bit, but there was this guy who lived in Camden in London, who I used to see regularly on the streets. And he was a street poet. And you never saw him at a reading or anything like that. He was just a sort of ordinary guy. He used to accost people, basically, and sort of declaim poems at them. It was a bit of a nuisance, right? But, I got to know him a little bit, and he called himself Street Talking Pete. Anyway, his real name was Pete Baines. And this is just a little poem about him. By the way, if Kathy's listening to this, Kathy will be listening to this, won't she? Then there's a dog in the poem. She might like that. Last time I saw Pete Baines, we were sitting eating chips outside some floodlit tennis court in Islington with all these hungry, locked-out kids yapping to each other across a catgut. So no sense in it, just crossfire chat. Did someone say his balls were on fire? Pete was searching for an audience too big to shift his gut far. He normally kept to his armchair, street-talking anyone in range. This is the guy who taught me poetry ends at the far reaches of your voice. He shouted out to the kids, but they were too deep into their own rap. His voice hit the court wall and bounced back. A spiky black dog came by and sniffed around him, waiting for him to drop something tasty. So he dropped England, flew off to Florida, got a job in a liquor store. 2 years later, I get a call. He's back. Meet me at Liverpool Street. I imagine him 1,000 more meals in his belly. When I get there, he's slim. Where's the dog? About midnight on the bus, ever watchful, he notices a long black dog skimming along the street. Do you notice when we got on the bus, that dog was on the other side of the street, and we've been 5 stops since then? Covered a lot of ground, huh? And then I got it. The dog's back. Here's a little poem. There's a couple of short poems here. This is a poem with a lot of O's in it. So this is how I would qualify this as a sound poem, because it's got a lot of O's. And it's about a conversation I had with this young woman on a train, not a train, a plane in the USA in America. We were flying. We were just coming to Dallas. To Houston. We were over Dallas, right? And she was very kind of nervous. She didn't like flying, and she was smoking all the time. Smoking. Of course, you could smoke on airplanes in those days. This is a very old poem. But I still like it. It's a very good one. I think it's one of my favorites, this. This is about the conversation. Hello, I'm Scorpio, says the girl from Idaho, chain smoking, dreaming of San Diego. The starry pinball circuitry below and the big round moon are all one over Dallas. I left that in sort of hotel rooms. Well, I was inspired because I went into a hotel room there and there was a Gideon's Bible, they leave the Bible, so I left the poem after it. And it was nice to do that, to feel that you could just leave poems behind you, Mouthings. These are 1 or 2 quick poems about my son when he was very small and he was, acquiring language. And he had very, very few words when I sort of wrote this piece. Mouthings could be mouth things. According to the book, he should have 6 to 8 words. He has beginnings but few ends. The fridge is covered by tiny printed strips, each one a word, magnetic poetry. You know about that? You know? Yeah. He reaches up, he's down here, he reaches up, peels them off, puts them into his mouth. I carefully extract, burn, rainbow, alcohol. 3 words that ought to be out of his reach. But poetry surely precedes speech. Thank you. Nice. Thank you. And here's another very quick poem about him. And about I mean, what is it like to hear these kind of strange words spoken to you? And he asked me once about allotment. What is an allotment? All right. So this poem is allotment. Allotment. Does it mean you get a lot? He asked. No, it's to do with being allocated a certain portion of ground for which you pay rent. I replied. As for our lot in life, the affordability of a garden or whatever, he was surely right to ponder what allotment. Shit, I've ruined it. I thought I could perform this one and I can't. He was surely right to ponder what a lot meant. That's how it's. Oh shit! Sorry, messed that one up. It had to happen. All right. I'm just going to read this fairly quickly. It's bio. I think this covers me from about the age of 1 to 15. I'm going to read it fairly quickly. One-year-old eye-op, wide-eyed, the first phantoms, voices, yes and yes, inside the forming of thought, a fortress, except the obduracy of things impinging, the assassination on the television, the handsome teacher, role model, greased-down hair, a suit, Morris Minor, slush, ice, slush, and more of same, bad accident, girl crushed by a lorry, world appended, yellow police markings to contain, never again. In cousin's room, pornography mags. Nearby, the sewage works, brick built, no sign of excrement in wells that plunge to God knows what, the imagining of pipes, a closed system, turds swirling down the pan, row, 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 chanting of boys' shared knits, brought on half-awake state, where sewer and erectile function became as one, the mystery of wells' relentless probing became as one with mother's body, tuberculosis scrape on the neck, the tiny pearl inside the skin discovered in the diving down and coming up, warmth of neck. Had woken, drenched in sweat, hallucinating little knickers on white sheets. Storybooks, flies more flies than can be imagined, crane flies horribly stuck together, frantic, brushing the light shade, shadows of needles of spikes. In darkest, deepest winter, the father had come home and she all alone had crept upon her, placed his cold hand on her back, the middle of her back eliciting a cry, smudges on white, and then the bath queued up for blazing fire, youngest first, then brothers, mum and dad getting worst of its soup. Sides of zinc bath, battleship grey, jets of urine fired underwater, torpedoes, the pencil broke, the pen ran out, and yet no measure for her mother's tail. A bird had swooped down, stolen the girl's thumb, kept it in her nest, genitalia observed from all angles in mirrors, outrageous baboon asshole. Most of it passed over, most of it ignored, unsayable anyway, time coagulated, the choking fit after the bone in the gullet, sensation of paralysis, the world alien, horror of never swallowing again, brought on the question of what was outside, what was in, and always a routine, have you opened your bowels? Oh, my legs, I'll flatten that cat. Bogies pursued into recesses of nostrils, rediscovered next day, teased into balls of oblivion, dirt from fingernails, smegma, mother's mortality, the one indescribable event. The snoring house, the pulse in the head had crept into the attic, moth collection, day-long lives behind the door in the wall, the roof, emptiness had heard the voices, yes and yes. Still the failure to resolve the sense that one thing meant and one thing was, the dead end, at street end, the chalking of stumps, ball-battered resistance until the small kitten accidentally kicked, the bubble of blood, the running in circles, the mewing, the drowning, mute before death. Had gone to bed early, peered out to sea, red smear leading to lump, strangled yowl, thinking, what could be done? The sole witness were the days of Moore's murderers, babes born into rituals of slaughter, unaccountable. Had spent time in garden, late afternoon sound magnified when sex came creeping, fantasies of canings, bend over. 11 plus pencil broke, not knowing, sat with pencil lead between fingers and thumb, afraid to ask. Cars of metal, of zinc, soldiers of tin, plastic Beatles wigs, models impossible to make, the longing before the windows, toys made for another class, seemed like another world seen in the sky, for once revealed, the headlands, the sea, a boat, distances, so that the walking home between places seemed in itself a loss, and all that mattered in another place, thick with night, gulped down with malt, to imagine what lies inside. Thank you. And so I'm going to finish, I think, with one, These are more recent pieces, various sorts. This one's got hankies. So that's all I've got. That's what I've got in my pocket. You know, that has to stand for a hanky these days. That's to stand in for a hanky. But a hanky was a square of material which your mother gave you. You know, she said, "Look after that." Well, I mean, you know, you had it in my pocket for years. Huh? Yeah. You got hankies. You see, people have got. Some people have still got them. Thank God, because this poem is a lament. This poem is a lament for the loss of the hanky. For the sake of that. Okay. Lost to fashion, stained off-white like our pillows, we hung onto them through thick and thin. The small rags we wrenched from our pockets, imprinted with numerous blowings, encrusted with pickings. I still have a pile of hankies in my drawer. Each time a virus hits, I use them up one after the other, ploughing through the pile Mum bequeathed me. Who else would have bought them? To arrive at the one at the bottom with R in the corner, my dad's initial. In time, only 2 images count, and there is only one issue. The regular sting of wet cotton against sore nose, a familiar bulge that never quite dries out. All this against the rise of the tissue. I don't know. I'm glad you're enjoying them, it's nice. But you see, there's no sound poetry anymore. But this one is about cultural noise. This poem is called Cultural Noise. And you know, this is my COVID poem. I'm sure everyone's got a COVID poem. I wrote one, and I wrote it at that time when, you know, the world was silent, and we were all enjoying it because we could actually hear birdsong again. Yeah, we didn't hear traffic so much on the roads. Actually, it was a pretty amazing time. So it's partly about that. It's partly about listening to the radio at that time. And one day, and they were talking, and they were desperate to try and amuse everybody, you know, amuse us in the circumstances. And they were talking about various things like, one of the things was that wild boar apparently had sort of manifested themselves in some town somewhere, you know, presumably because there were no more cars and the wild boar were roaming onto the road or something, yeah. So they were talking about that on the radio. They also used this phrase, cultural noise. So I used this in the poem. And so this is a kind of sound poem, although there's no, Cultural noise. Good name for a band, I thought. But there's less of it now. Cultural noise. The mutterings of poets trying out phrases. The rustling of the mind's curtains. No cars. Good days for hedgehogs. Wild boar emboldened. Peacocks strutting in Bangor. They say birdsong is heightened, less background interference, mating rituals re-established. Here, in the labyrinth of the inner ear, we await the day's vibrations. And going out to exercise in the yard are suddenly encircled by sirens. And maybe one or two more. These are fairly recent. I think you'll know who this is about. It's called In Green Ink. Hubris boiled down to the last particle. An old shopping list of human aspirations, empires, art collections, great books, fine buildings, and towards the bottom, kindnesses, small gestures in their billions, those times we might have said, enough's enough, self-driving cars, have we gone mad? A silk purse, a sow's ear, beds made and unmade, one man's inhuman resolve, the shutting of curtains of iron, such that even a fly cannot enter. And the other poem I wrote about him is this, and this is called The Food Taster, because, he doesn't, in this position, he would not want to be poisoned. This is The Food Taster. Speaking, I was always an expert in tasting things were fishy. In the orphanage, I steered clear of the dressed eggs. Things went downhill after the last rigged election. They found out how I voted, and then it was prison or the current job. They used mice for this at one time. Now there's a small army of us. We feel honoured. A few crumbs of the boss's meal are worth a fortune. Risks? Well, of course, risks are involved. I always take the smallest mouthful. The spittoon is handed over and the agents eye me closely, like the parents I never had. Alert the tiniest muscle tremor, the slightest hiccup. It usually takes a few hours, then I can clock off. I'd like to read this one because it's about, this is, for me, is the times we're in here, right? I live my life with a pessimist, my other half, she to my he, or vice versa. Headlines course through our times. She dips a foot in the stream, comes back soaked. All is well, I whisper. Whose voice is that? She replies. We lie in bed, all tucked up with the sheets stripped off. Outside, the drought harries the garden. She tugs at the non-existent covers, longing to be warm. It could have been us, she says in her sleep. It wasn't us, be thankful, I reply. She knows about my secret pact with God. He's moved into the spare room, hoping for reassurances. There's no moving out for anyone now. So I'll just do the last couple of poems now. And this one is called Still the Wound. Still the wound, not gouged out the word, not the world, but the written wrong. Stilled on the tongue, the calling back, not the sense, but the knocked back senseless. Styled for correction, the syllables vigil, not the silence, but inside the spelling out. Steeled for utterance, the insult's glamour. Not the tongue-tied, but strangling the say-so. Stalled for invention, the leggings of the letting go. Not the avoidance, but the fall-back's footfall. Stayed in mid-sentence, the ends of the falling off. Not the finished, but brought to the lean-to. Stored in stillness, but gauged from the gagging back. Not the accomplished, but snagged on the never-never. Stowed in the afterlife, the pointlessness of all or nothings. Not the preparing, but strung out in servitude. Stunned by the sentinels of well-intentioned half-admissions. Not the waiting, but the point of returning to. Not the wound, gouged out the word, still the wound, not gouged out the word. And just finish with this one. Beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo. Beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo, flush the loo, flush the loo. Beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo, beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo, flush the loo, flush the loo. Beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo. Beetroot, beetroot, red poo, red poo, flush the loo, flush the loo, flush the loo, flush the loo. Thank you. And I think now it's great because it's been fantastic this evening. I really enjoyed listening to my fellow poets who've all been absolutely brilliant. And the idea now is that we're going to do a kind of joint thing at the end, and we're going to pay another little tribute to Bob Cobbing. And I was with him on one occasion. We were doing a reading, I think it was in Apples and Snakes in London, and he suddenly he said, "Well, what are we going to read now?" And he grabbed a beer mat and he said, "Let's read this." So we did a beer mat reading. We managed to do it somehow, and I think we're going to try and do one now. Ian, have you got the beer mats?
Printed gold notes. Bread with gold.
Printed gold notes.
Full.
Printed gold notes.
Full.
Gold notes.
Full.
Gold notes.
Full. Full.
Gold notes. Gold notes. Printed gold notes.
Full. Is. Gun. Gun.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's great.
Thank you all the poets, and thanks for letting me join in at the end. That was fantastic. Just a final round of applause to David Hopkins, Karenjit Sandhu, Anthony Capildeo, and Philip Terry. And long may your poetics be sonic. And thanks to those of us joining at home as well.